The views and opinions expressed on this podcast is solely of the creator and may not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the listener. Listener discretion is advised. ChatGPT and AI technologies were not used or harmed in the creation of this podcast. It is solely 100% human-made by me, your host, Melanie. And this is Under the Moon Paranormal presents Ohio Legends. The full moon in Geminis puts the emotional full moon in the sign of the mind and expression. So, Gemini full moons are usually times where we express what we're feeling more easily, and we can say what we mean and mean what we say. We can be authentic and open, and we want to feel understood. We can connect mentally with others, and we can focus on the ideas and plans that connect us emotionally. We likely need an outlet for our minds so we don't overthink things, cause stress and anxiety for ourselves, and cause a mental meltdown. The full moon also makes no aspects but comes on the same day that Mercury retrograde ends. Finally. The full moon is almost 12 hours before. And Mercury is the natural ruler of Gemini, which means we're extra focused on the retrograde energy. We may struggle with something emotional coming out of the retrograde. There might be upsetting news, outright bad news. Something might be coming to an end. Something might not feel like it's ending the right way. People just, the basic audacity of some people during this time. So just work on communication skills, what you say to people, and be kind during this full moon, okay? Because retrograde's ending, but Mars retrograde starts in February, so that might be why the energy is so intense right now. Okay, so this month I'm bringing you the story of Fallsville Ghost Town, an Ohio ghost town, okay? And I'm recording everything a little different, so I hope everything sounds okay and looks okay, and you guys hear me all right. Okay, so Fallsville. When it first was settled in the mid-1800s, many people had thought or hoped the village would soon prosper, but for a short time it did. The town's first settlers were Simon and Elizabeth Clouser, moved in and set up a mill, which was in demand at the time, for there wasn't any other mills in the immediate vicinity. Before long, it had a general store, a stone quarry, and it looked as if the town was heading in a good direction. Except in a letter dated January 7, 1872, Phileas Von Puff, who is a real person and definitely not a Disney villain, begins praising the community of Fallsville, stating it has a population of 2,000 people, saying about how 12 buildings had been built in the previous year and suggested that there's a lot more on the way. He notes the natural beauty of the surrounding area, the morals of the town's current inhabitants, citing a local Quaker church, the Oddfellows, the Sons of Temperance, as well as the rooms of the YMCA as signs of town's promise, okay? The town's principal manufacturing business, as he called it, was the mills, which he said probably exceeds not just production quality, but also quantity, as it's compared to all the other mills in the country. The purpose of the letter was an attempt to attract a railroad. At the time, railroads were already making their way into smaller Highland County cities such as my hometown of Greenfield, and they prosper greatly after they get the railroad. So after building a railroad depot and essentially everything they could to attract one, but sadly, however, by the time of the turn of the 20th century, everything the town had been known for seems to have all but died off. Were the nearby newspapers used to report all sorts of activity in Falls or around Fallsville? By then, it was little more than a real estate transfer and notices of nearby road work. The only thing of any real value was noted but the Fallsville Fall. It's a waterfall. It's a beautiful, picturesque waterfall. and the town had been named after it. Today, the town of Fallsville is rather hard to find on a map. A whole town and much of the surviving area has now been taken over by the Fallsville Wildlife Area and is known today as its hiking trails and wildlife. And of course, that big waterfall, which is lovely during the fall time. You can still visit the Auburn Community Church and the cemetery, which is easily accessible via Cary Town Road. Beyond that, little remains of a few building foundations here and there, with a little hint that these structures may have been once used for. But mostly Fallsville had been reclaimed by nature. Beyond that, the only myths and legends remain. There are those who believe that certain town residents were witches, casting spells, practicing magic, and acting really, really, really weird. Actually, that last part is undeniably true, but acting weird doesn't make you a witch, I guess. There are those who believe that on certain days of the year you can spot the spectral form of an indigenous American girl walking through the woods looking for something. Likewise, the spirit of an older indigenous man can be making his rounds too, which may or may not be connected to the legend that says there are missing cache of riches buried somewhere near Fallsville. Aside from the particular stunning waterfall, Fallsville does not seem to get the love and attention it probably deserves. In light of all the myths and legends associated with the area, it's easy to dismiss the town just as another ghost town, a place that once existed but is no more. Nothing of major historical value seems to happen here, so why am I bringing you this story? Okay, so let's actually talk about a little bit of the history of the place. The first settlers were the Clausers, Father Simon, Mother Elizabeth. Their first son was named Nelson, and then Charlotte, and then two boys, Louis and Samuel, and then Susanna. The Clauser name must have carried some weight in Fallsville and the surrounding community. Shortly after moving to the area, Simon and Elizabeth opened the mill, which is also the biggest employer in town. Some people claim that the Clauser family were witches. This was, direct because they were wealthy. Okay, so casting magic, money spells, something like that must have been involved, right? However, it's more likely an reaction to those who found the family to be a bit weird. Okay, they were rich, but you can call them eccentric if you want, okay? To be fair, the wealthy have odd habits, don't they? However, stories like this are usually confined to larger cities, not small towns. There are two stories that have been told over the year. The first is about the newspaper gossip columns going between the Clauser families. In 1886 is when it all started, about a wealthy copperhead who refused to give some breakfast to a wary Union soldier. So that's what started the gossip about the Clauser family, which is odd. They say that the guy that refused to give the soldier food was Simon Clauser. Okay, so there was like 3 papers arguing about how the Clausers are weird. Isn't that strange how that happened back then? Today, people just shit talk each other on Facebook, right? Okay, so the parents passed away in around 1901, and the brothers, they moved away. So the 2 sisters were left at Fallsville. After the father died, the mother died, and the 2 sisters were alone. The oldest brother, Samuel, not the oldest one, Nelson's the oldest one, Samuel, would come and visit his sisters, and that got into the paper too, because they wouldn't let him sleep in the house. They told him that no men were allowed in the house after the dad died, which is weird. Let's face it, that's weird. Okay, so then they were gossiping about that. The sisters say that's not true. We thanked him for his gifts and sent him on his way. So according to legend, we're going to talk about the ghost of Fallsville and why I'm telling this story on Christmas. According to legend, picture this. On Christmas Eve, an indigenous person was running through the Fallsville area, trying to escape a small posse of white dudes that for some reason wanted him unalive. Some say Mr. Indigenous had unalived a white family and stolen their valuables. I don't think that's true. And the white men were chasing him where their friends and neighbors were trying to bring the man to justice and trying to recover their stolen property. That's not true. We stole this place from them. Another version has the indigenous being pursued by white men who only wanted his treasure or money and were willing to do anything to get it. I believe that. The legend continues by the treasure somehow being buried somewhere in or around Fallsville. Some claims the indigenous man buried it so he could flee, and the pursuers came back to the treasures for later. Only he was unalived and nobody could find the treasure after that. Others claim that the man who unalived him buried it so they could come back for it later, but they never did. What these tales all seem to have in common is that the treasure got buried and is probably still out there, and someone unalived an indigenous man. The legend continues even further because all good legends need to feature a ghost or two, right? According to the legend, many people who live in and around Fallsville have been claiming that every Christmas Eve, someone or something knocks on their doors at nightfall. Some say it's the indigenous man looking to show the occupants where his treasure is, and some claim it's the indigenous little girl who is trying to find her final resting place. And some say the indigenous man is the indigenous girl's dad, but we don't really know what's going on here with this. The little girl's ghost is roaming the area looking for something. The details of all these legends might be fun stories to tell, but it's hard to believe that any of it ever happened. There's no record of anywhere that suggests an indigenous man unalived a white family and stole all their belongings. Don't you think they put that in the gossip column if that was true? Multiple people were involved, and certainly there would be something, right? Somewhere, if there was that many people involved. But oftentimes legends do contain at least a small bit of truth, so perhaps there is buried treasure somewhere out there around Fallsville. I just highly doubt it has anything to do with an unalived indigenous person. Another version of the buried treasure story brings us back to the Clouser family. There are some who have tried to suggest that the treasure was buried well before Simon and Elizabeth Clouser moved to Fallsville. This time, the couple are looking at the land around Fallsville when they stumble upon a buried treasure. This gives them the sudden uptick in wealth they need in order to buy the mill in the first place. While a slightly different version say they found it on the property, and this explains how they come into such money as they did. This explains their wealth, is what people are saying. Some people suggest that it was Mr. Clouser who cornered the indigenous man and unalived him, burying the loot somewhere on his property, where supposedly it remains to this day. So, the more I learn about the Clouser family, the more questions I left myself having. For example, there is a grave at the Auburn Cemetery, and it just says Clouser child. On document, they have the children I mentioned. So is it one of the girls' kids, or was this in between one of the kids? There's just no record of it. So the other boys got married, so it could have been one of their kids before they moved, but they did move away. So they never got married. Combine that with the story of how they forbid their brother to sleep in their house after the dad died, and the way that some of the fellow Fallsville residents describe them as eccentric or odd, it makes me wonder if there's another story here as well, with the child Clouser being buried there. So Charlotte Clouser passed away in 1908 after battling an illness. Her sister Susanna was the last remaining member of the family and passed away a few years later in 1914. Susan, now in her 80s, was found deceased laying in the bottom of the stairs in her home and was found by a neighbor. No signs of foul play were discovered, so it's believed that she somehow fell down the stairs and immediately died. However, there's one more final secret that Susan held on to that would come as a shock to at least a few people, including her brother and her nieces and nephews. Had Susan passed away without leaving a will, nobody before her death had a reason to believe that she had one. The Fallsville property and the house and the well, as any wealth, would be split between, nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters, whoever was left. So it came as a surprise when a will did eventually show up, leaving a few small bequests to various individuals, and the rest of the property, which valued at the time as $3,500, went to Dr. V.B. McConaughey, leaving that all her relatives with nothing. She left them with nothing. Yet another mystery befell in 1886. Okay, let's go back a little bit. When their house was burnt to the ground. It's impossible to tell how thorough that investigation was, but it was fairly clear that the Clouser sisters thought that the colored man named Andrew Payton, who just so happened to have bought land from them, was the culprit of the crime. At the trial, the prosecutors barely laid out any evidence against the man at all. After proceedings were handed over to the defense, Payton's attorney offered evidence that called the prosecutor's evidence into question. For example, leading it from the site of the arson to a complete set of horse tracks, when he stated that the day before the fire he had worked on Payton's horse. And the horse is only wearing 3 shoes, so it was impossible that the full set of tracks was left by Payton and his horse. When the trial was over, the judge had some stern words for the prosecutor. He noted that not only the vaguely circumstantial case, but also how, during the trial, the prosecutor did not attempt to dispute any evidence, nor did he even attempt to cross-examine a single witness. The judge told him that if he was unable to defend the charges brought against the man, they shouldn't have brought any at all. Good for that judge. Good for him. So, while I was doing research for this podcast, I was pleasantly surprised by the amount of historical information I was finding when going through old newspapers. The course had me sifting through a ton of mundane information on things like announcements of roads, bridge buildings, estate or land transfers, and of course the brief mentions of social gossip. So that was kind of weird. What was the most surprising, however, was now nearly everything I was finding somehow connected to the Clouser family. Not all of them, but by far the vast majority. In a way, it's not surprising since the family operated the mill, which was the town's largest business. Many of the other townsfolk mentioned in the papers not just the land transfers or gossip columns, but in a variety of other articles as well. Usually something like listing names of teachers or schoolhouses, blah, blah, blah. Or even this one article, a cow was wandering around, and that was, like, people were bored back then. Even forgetting that particular family, there's still something about the town of Fallsville that captures the imagination and wants to make itself known. The town has occasionally appeared in novels, such as one from the lovely author Debbie Williams, whose book of For the Love of Fallsville is a perfect example. So, just for a moment, let's forget that Fallsville was ever a town. Let's forget its history, as well as various myths, legends associated there. Today, the Fallsville wildlife area is a rather popular destination for locals and travelers, especially those into hiking, hunting, fishing, birding. Because hunters are known to roam the area, it's a great idea to wear bright-colored clothes or leave your deer furry costumes at home, people. Wear bright clothes. But definitely check out the Auburn Community Church and the Auburn Cemetery. And according to everybody I know who has seen it, the waterfall is definitely worth the trip alone. But yeah, that is the story of the Fallsville Christmas Ghost Story. Okay, so I have a couple of listener-submitted stories for you guys this month. So the first one is from Savannah Thomason. Hey honeys, paranormal story time here. I'm bored and I figured that I would tell you something that happened to me whenever I was around 6 or 7 years old. I've had a couple of other paranormal experiences, but this, accompanied by some other things I'll mention, has me thinking. Whenever I was a kid, I was sitting crisscrossed on my floor, and in my bed it was to the left of me. I had a stack of playing cards in my hand, and I was attempting to shuffle them, the way you do whenever you split the deck and the cards fall into one stack. Needless to say, my child self failed to shuffle it properly, and the cards scattered everywhere. I had gathered the majority of the cards except for 3. One was in front of me, slightly to the left, close by the bed, and the other 2 cards were under my bed. I grabbed the third to last card, and for the final 2 cards, I leaned forward, stuck my arm under the bed, and froze. Now, I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but I promise you I am being 100% honest. I saw this. It wasn't me imagining anything, and it wasn't me dreaming. This happened to me while I was awake and aware. Whenever I leaned forward and looked underneath my bed, I saw a black humanoid figure laying on its stomach and staring directly at me with piercing white eyes. It had no facial features, but it was in the shape of a male. Its hands were placed out to its side in a push-up position, and it felt pure evil. I kid you not, I have never in my life experienced such a terrifying feeling ever since. I screamed and I started sobbing. It genuinely terrified me, and I ran to my mom and my mamaw and told them that there was something under my bed. They looked at each other concerned because even they could tell how scared I was. Whenever they went to look, there was nothing there, of course. I refused to go back in that room. Well, ever since, I've had these nightmares where I'm being chased. I lucid dream, so I'm aware that I'm dreaming, and I always try to rationalize what's going on. There's some demonic thing chasing me in my dreams, and I always try to get help, but everyone is oblivious to what's happening to me. And recently in my dreams, I've just been submitting to whatever evil force it is and letting them unalive me so I can wake up and not experience it any longer. I occasionally go into these trance-like states, and it doesn't feel like me. Also, anytime something bad happens to me, I feel protected. I always feel that I'll be fine in life because of someone else. I had a dream about an alternate version of me, and he told me that he'd protect me. I know that all of this sounds insane, but I also know that I am 100% not lying. I am telling the truth. Do my dreams mean anything in correlation with the event I had as a child, or is it all just random? Thanks for reading, honeys. Oh my goodness. That's terrifying. Could you imagine? I couldn't imagine. That's terrifying. The second story that I have for you is by Katie Hunter. 9 years ago, I was working my first nursing job in a nursing home. One hall held completely lucid people on one side and not so lucid people on the other side. Cameras were throughout the whole building, and nurses monitored the cameras. So at 3 a.m. while watching the camera, we saw a shadow move across the hall. Now other things happened previously, so the shadow spooked us. 2 of us walked very hesitantly into the hallway. No one was in it, of course. We walked to the spot we saw on the camera, and it was ice cold. The not so lucid person was mumbling, "Mean man, mean man." Then the sweet lady across the hall screamed. We all ran into her room. The normally cool, calm, and collected lady was curled in a ball in the corner. She was trembling from head to toe and crying so hard. She asked if we saw him, and we asked who she saw. She said she didn't know who he was, but he was evil. At that moment, the call light 5 doors down went off. The other nurse went to check. She ran back, white as a sheet. She said, "That's the unoccupied room." We exchanged a glance and did our best to remain calm. The old lady asked to come to our office and lay on the couch. Of course, we agreed. We got her in her wheelchair and calmly hurried her to the front. She dozed on the couch as we looked at the cameras. We again saw the shadow moving. It was leaving her room, and then it vanished. I have never been so scared in my life. That place was haunted as hell. Wow. Yeah, nursing homes, no, don't like them. Don't like them. They're haunted just like hospitals are. So, if you want me to read your story on my podcast, please email me at underthemoonparapod@gmail.com and I will read your story on the show. Guys, we made it through 2024. Holy cow, can you believe it? So I'm hoping that next year isn't as scary as I think it's going to be under the reign of Trump, you know? So enjoy your holidays with your family or not. Do what you want to do. Live your life the way you want to. And from me and Under the Moon Paranormal, I wish you a merry everything and a happy always. Stay spooky.